This is a sacred place, dedicated to the memory of American soldiers who gave their lives.
Today you'll discover the story of Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, a tomb guard at Arlington National Cemetery, whose unwavering dedication to honor would be tested by a group of disrespectful tourists in a moment that would forever change their understanding of what it truly means to guard the sacred. Prepare yourself for a narrative full of tension, respect, and the profound weight of duty. Before we begin this incredible story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're listening to this story from. The morning mist hung low over Arlington National Cemetery as Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his pristine white gloves for the final time before beginning his shift. At 28 years old, Marcus had spent the last 4 years as a tomb guard, one of the most elite and respected positions in the United States Army. His uniform was immaculate, every crease sharp enough to cut paper, every button polished to mirror perfection, his shoes reflecting the early morning sun like black glass. The tomb of the unknown soldier stood before him, a massive white marble monument that had watched over the remains of unidentified American servicemen since 1921. Marcus felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders as he prepared for the changing of the guard ceremony. This wasn't just a job, it was a sacred duty that he and his fellow guards took more seriously than life itself. "Rodriguez, you're up," called Staff Sergeant Jennifer Walsh from the guard quarters. Her voice carried the same reverence that all tomb guards possessed when speaking about their duties. Jennifer had been Marcus's mentor when he first arrived at Arlington, teaching him that being a tomb guard meant embodying perfection in every movement, every breath, every heartbeat. Marcus nodded silently and began his approach to the tomb. His steps were measured and precise, exactly 21 steps from end to end, a number chosen to represent the highest military honor, the 21-gun salute. Each step took exactly 1.5 seconds, his rifle held at the perfect angle against his shoulder. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and the distant sounds of Washington, D.C., awakening to another day. As he took his position, Marcus noticed a group of tourists gathering behind the chain barriers. Most visitors to the tomb understood the solemnity of the place. They spoke in hushed whispers, removed their hats, and watched with the respect that the sacred ground demanded. But this particular group seemed different. There were 5 of them, college-age kids from somewhere in the Midwest based on their accents, and they were treating the ceremony like entertainment at a theme park. "Look at this guy," one of them said loudly, pointing at Marcus as he began his methodical patrol. "Just walking back and forth like a robot. What's the big deal? He's just a sentry." Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his pace never wavered. 21 steps. Turn. Face the tomb for 21 seconds. Turn. 21 steps back. This was his rhythm, his meditation, his prayer for the fallen soldiers who lay beneath the marble. The group's leader, a young man wearing a backwards baseball cap and a fraternity t-shirt, seemed emboldened by his friend's laughter. "Hey, soldier boy," he called out, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "Can you do anything else besides walk? Maybe dance for us?" Marcus continued his patrol, his face a mask of professional composure, but inside, a fire was building. He had heard disrespect before. It came with the territory. But something about this group's casual dismissal of the sacred ground they stood on struck him differently. Perhaps it was the way they laughed while standing mere feet from the tomb of soldiers who had died nameless far from home, their bodies never identified but their sacrifice eternal. The young man in the baseball cap wasn't finished. "Come on, man, lighten up. It's just a bunch of old bones in there. They can't hear you marching around." His friends erupted in laughter, and one of them pulled out a phone to start recording. "This is going to be hilarious on social media. Soldier takes his job way too seriously." Staff Sergeant Walsh, who had been observing from the guard quarters, felt her hands clench into fists. She had seen Marcus handle difficult situations before, but she could see the tension building in his shoulders, the slight tightening around his eyes that only someone who knew him well would notice. The tomb guards were trained to maintain their composure under any circumstances, but they were also human beings, with deep respect for the fallen. The group's behavior was attracting attention from other visitors. An elderly veteran wearing a Vietnam War cap looked on with disgust, his wife placing a gentle hand on his arm to keep him from intervening. A family with young children quickly moved away, the parents not wanting their kids to witness such disrespect. The contrast was stark. On one side, people who understood the gravity of where they stood, and on the other, individuals who saw only an opportunity for entertainment. "I bet he's not even a real soldier," the ringleader continued, his voice growing louder and more obnoxious. "Probably just some actor they hired to put on a show. Look at him, he won't even acknowledge us. What kind of soldier ignores American citizens?" Marcus completed another turn, his movement still flawless despite the growing distraction. But those who knew the signs could see the storm building. His breathing had become more controlled, more deliberate. His grip on his rifle had tightened just slightly. The morning sun caught the perspiration that had begun to form on his forehead, not from exertion, but from the tremendous effort it was taking to maintain his professional demeanor. The young man took a step closer to the chain barrier, his friends egging him on. "Hey, I'm talking to you. Don't you have to respond when a citizen asks you a question? Isn't that like in the Constitution or something?" He turned to his friends with a smirk. "Watch this. I'm going to make him break character." What the group didn't understand was that Marcus Rodriguez hadn't become a tomb guard by accident. He had volunteered for this position after losing his best friend, Corporal David Chen, in Afghanistan. David's body had been recovered, but Marcus had seen too many soldiers who weren't so fortunate, men and women who had given everything for their country and whose families would never have a grave to visit. The tomb of the unknown soldier represented all of them, and Marcus carried their memory with him every single day. The disrespectful tourist reached into his pocket and pulled out a small stone he had picked up from the pathway. "Let's see if he's really as disciplined as he pretends to be," he said with a malicious grin. Before his friends could stop him, he threw the stone, aiming it to land just in front of Marcus's path. The stone skittered across the marble, the sound sharp and jarring in the sacred silence. Marcus's step faltered for just a fraction of a second, so brief that most observers wouldn't have noticed. But he noticed, and in that moment, something inside him shifted. The stone came to rest just inches from Marcus's polished boot as he completed his 21st step. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. He stood perfectly still, his back straight, his rifle at the precise angle it had maintained for thousands of hours of duty. The morning air seemed to thicken with tension, as every person in the vicinity held their breath, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Then, with movements so sharp and precise they seemed to cut through the air itself, Marcus executed a perfect about-face and began walking directly toward the group of tourists. His steps were no longer the measured pace of his patrol. They were the deliberate, purposeful strides of a soldier who had reached his limit. Each footfall echoed off the marble like a drumbeat, announcing that the game these young people thought they were playing was about to end. "Oh shit," whispered one of the friends, suddenly realizing that their leader's actions had crossed a line they hadn't even known existed. "Dude, I think you really messed up." But the ringleader, either too proud or too stupid to recognize the gravity of the situation, stood his ground. "What's he going to do? He can't leave his post. He's just trying to scare us." His voice carried less confidence than his words suggested, and his friends began to take small steps backward. Marcus stopped exactly 3 feet from the chain barrier, close enough that the tourists could see every detail of his uniform, every line of determination etched into his face. When he spoke, his voice was low, controlled, and carried the weight of absolute authority. It was a voice that had commanded respect in combat zones, a voice that had comforted dying soldiers, a voice that now represented the honor of every fallen American serviceman. "It is requested," Marcus began, his words cutting through the morning air like a blade, "that everyone maintain an atmosphere of silence and respect at all times while visiting the tomb of the unknown soldier." He paused, letting the words sink in, his eyes fixed on the young man who had thrown the stone. "This is a sacred place, dedicated to the memory of American soldiers who gave their lives in service to their country and whose remains were never identified." The transformation in the atmosphere was immediate and profound. Other visitors who had been watching the confrontation unfold moved closer, drawn by the power and dignity in Marcus's voice. The elderly Vietnam veteran straightened his shoulders, recognizing in Marcus the same dedication he had once carried. Parents pulled their children closer, understanding that they were witnessing something important, something that would teach their kids about respect and honor. Marcus continued, his voice never rising but somehow filling the entire space around the tomb. "The soldiers who rest here died far from home in foreign lands, fighting for the freedoms that allow you to stand here today. They died nameless but not forgotten. They died unknown but not unhonored. And as long as I draw breath, as long as I wear this uniform, I will ensure that they receive the respect they have earned with their sacrifice. The young man who had been so bold moments before now found himself unable to meet Marcus's gaze. The stone he had thrown seemed to burn in his peripheral vision, a physical reminder of his disrespect. His friends had gone completely silent, the reality of their behavior finally sinking in. "You called me just a sentry," Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of steel that made several people in the crowd shiver. "Let me explain to you what just a sentry means. I am a member of the 3rd United States Infantry Regiment, known as the Old Guard. I have undergone months of training to earn the right to stand here. I have memorized the names and details of every Medal of Honor recipient. I can recite the history of every major battle fought by American forces. I maintain this uniform to standards that would make a drill sergeant weep with pride." He took a single step closer to the barrier, and the young man instinctively stepped back. "I stand here in all weather, rain, snow, heat, and cold. I have maintained my vigil through hurricanes and blizzards. I have never missed a step, never broken my pace, never failed in my duty. And I do all of this not for recognition, not for praise, but for them." He gestured toward the tomb with a movement so precise it seemed choreographed. "For the soldiers, who can no longer stand guard themselves." The silence that followed Marcus's words was deafening. Even the sounds of distant traffic seemed muted, as if the entire city of Washington, D.C. was holding its breath out of respect for what was happening at the tomb. The young man who had started this confrontation looked around desperately for support from his friends, but found only embarrassed faces and downcast eyes. Marcus wasn't finished. His training had taught him that sometimes a moment of education was worth more than a lifetime of punishment. "You want to know what makes someone just a sentry?" he continued, his voice carrying across the marble plaza. "Let me tell you about the unknown soldier from World War I, whose remains lie beneath this marble. He was found on a battlefield in France, his body so damaged by artillery that no one could identify him. But someone, a mother, a father, a wife, a child, loved him. Someone waited for him to come home. Someone never got to say goodbye." Tears had begun to form in the eyes of several onlookers. The elderly veteran removed his cap and held it over his heart, his own memories of fallen comrades flooding back. A young mother pulled her son closer, whispering to him about the importance of remembering those who had sacrificed everything. "The unknown from World War II," Marcus continued, "was pulled from the waters of the Pacific, his ship sunk by enemy fire. He might have been 19 years old, maybe 20. He might have had a sweetheart back home, dreams of college, plans for a family. Instead, he lies here, representing every sailor who went down with his ship, every Marine who died on a beach thousands of miles from home." The ringleader's baseball cap had somehow found its way into his hands, though he couldn't remember removing it. His face had gone pale and his earlier bravado had completely evaporated. One of his friends, a young woman who had been laughing just minutes before, was now openly crying. "And the unknown from Korea," Marcus's voice grew softer but no less powerful, "froze to death in a foxhole, probably calling for his mother as the life left his body. He was someone's son, someone's brother, someone's hope for the future. But he died alone in the dark, in a war that most people have forgotten." Marcus paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the crowd. When he spoke again, his voice carried a personal note that hadn't been there before. "I had a friend, Corporal David Chen. We served together in Afghanistan. David was funny, always making jokes to keep our spirits up during the hard times. He was going to be a teacher when he got home, wanted to work with kids who didn't have many opportunities. David died when our convoy hit an IED. We found his body, we brought him home. His family got to bury him. But there were others on that deployment who weren't so lucky. Soldiers who were blown apart so completely that we never found enough pieces to identify. Those soldiers they're represented here too." The young man who had thrown the stone was now visibly shaking. The reality of what this place represented, what Marcus's duty meant, had finally penetrated his consciousness. I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Marcus heard him, but he wasn't finished. "You see this rifle?" He adjusted his grip on the M14, its polished wood and metal gleaming in the morning sun. "It's not just for show. Every tomb guard is a combat-trained soldier. We're chosen not just for our ability to march and look impressive, but for our dedication, our character. and our willingness to defend this sacred ground with our lives if necessary. We don't just guard a tomb, we guard the memory of every American who died in service to their country. Staff Sergeant Walsh, who had been watching from the guard quarters, felt a surge of pride in her protégé. This was what the tomb guard was about, not just ceremony and tradition, but education and remembrance. Marcus was doing more than defending the dignity of the tomb. He was teaching these young people about sacrifice, about honor, about the true cost of freedom. The transformation in the group of tourists was complete and profound. What had begun as a moment of juvenile disrespect had become a lesson in humility and honor that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The young man who had thrown the stone stepped forward, his hands trembling as he approached the chain barrier. "Sergeant," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't know how to apologize for what I did. I was ignorant, disrespectful, and I'm ashamed of my behavior. Is there anything I can do to make this right?" Marcus studied the young man's face, seeing genuine remorse where moments before there had been only arrogance. This was the moment that separated good soldiers from great ones, the ability to recognize when discipline had achieved its purpose, when punishment could give way to redemption. "You can learn," Marcus said simply. "You can remember this moment, and you can share what you've learned with others. You can understand that freedom isn't free, and that the liberties you enjoy were purchased with the blood of soldiers who believed in something greater than themselves." The young man nodded vigorously, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks. "I will. I promise I will." He looked around at his friends, who were all nodding in agreement. "We all will." Marcus maintained his position for another moment, then executed a perfect about-face and began walking back toward the tomb. But before he resumed his patrol, he stopped and turned back to the crowd that had gathered. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the marble plaza, "you are welcome here. This place belongs to all Americans and to all people who value freedom and honor. But please remember that you stand on sacred ground. The soldiers who rest here gave everything so that you could live in peace. The least we can do is give them our respect." As Marcus resumed his patrol, the crowd began to disperse, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Visitors spoke in hushed, reverent tones. Parents used the moment to teach their children about sacrifice and service. The elderly veteran approached the young man who had thrown the stone and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, beginning a conversation that would last for over an hour. The group of college students remained at the tomb for the rest of the morning, watching the changing of the guard ceremony with newfound understanding and respect. They read every plaque, studied every detail of the monument, and asked thoughtful questions of the park rangers. When they finally left Arlington National Cemetery, they were different people than they had been when they arrived. Word of the incident spread quickly through the military community and beyond. Videos taken by other visitors showed Marcus's dignified response to the disrespect, and his words were shared across social media platforms. But rather than seeking fame or recognition, Marcus continued his duties with the same quiet professionalism he had always shown. Months later, the young man who had thrown the stone returned to Arlington National Cemetery. This time he came alone, dressed respectfully, and carrying a wreath. He placed it at the base of the tomb and stood in silent contemplation for nearly an hour. When Marcus, who was on duty that day, completed his patrol and passed near the young man, their eyes met briefly. No words were exchanged, but the nod of recognition and respect that passed between them spoke volumes. The incident at the tomb of the unknown soldier became more than just a moment of discipline. It became a testament to the power of education, the importance of respect, and the enduring strength of those who choose to serve something greater than themselves. Marcus Rodriguez continued his duties as a tomb guard, knowing that he had not only protected the honor of the fallen, but had also helped to create new guardians of that honor among the living. In the end, the young man's dismissive words, "just a sentry," had been transformed into a profound understanding of what it truly means to stand guard over the sacred, to honor the fallen, and to ensure that their sacrifice is never forgotten.